Thank you all the folks that are online for waiting. We do have a quorum. It's 4:05, and we're going to begin today's Arroyo Seco GSA board meeting. With that,
thank you. I've got one right here. Roll call then.
Vice Chair Griva,
Here.
Board Member Rodriguez, Board Member Wood,
Here.
and Board Member White.
Here. Very good. Well, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance then.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item D. Public comments from the audience regarding items not on the agenda.
okay, Mr. Chair, I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay. E, consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and may be approved by one action of the agency unless a request for removal for discussion or explanation is received prior to the time agency votes on the motion to adopt.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item F, agency business. F1, consider of approval of scope of work to integrate demand management into the SMC tax annual review process. A, report.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, you've got a report in front of you and a draft scope of work. Let me start with an apology. In the report, it discusses the Salinas Valley Basin GSA's demand management policy. There is not a policy in place at this time. And it's words matter, it's important. It is a framework. It has not developed into a fully developed policy. And in fact, I think their board thus far has essentially accepted the framework, and it's still a work in progress. There's still a long ways to go. More on that later in the meeting. I'll talk a bit about both the advisory committee meeting that was held last week and yesterday's Forebay implementation subcommittee meeting. Nevertheless, there is an ongoing effort to develop some sort of demand management framework. And I came and spoke with you pretty much at length last year towards the end of the year. And you all gave me direction to work with Gus Yates and to develop a demand management program for the Arroyo Seco Cone management area, which may be applicable to larger areas in the Forebay and even the Upper Valley. One of the principal items that I was concerned about in the development of the framework for the Salinas Valley Basin GSA was a lack of real clarity on how the SMC TAC, which admittedly only functions for the Forebay and the Upper Valley, would work into and be integrated into any kind of demand management framework or policy or program. Nevertheless, the framework that the Salinas Valley Basin GSA had developed was largely built upon the work that the SMC TAC had done. And even they've got some categories for varying degrees of action based upon how many wells or threshold items have been exceeded. So with that as a backdrop, Gus and I got together and talked about what we wanted to do. If you go through the scope, you'll note that it's largely process driven, because we really need to identify how the SMC tax work will be integrated into a decision-making hierarchy for the Arroyo Seco Cone management, which makes sense. And we need to get out and work through those details. one of the interesting things, probably for me, one of the most interesting things in the scope was a recognition that in the development of demand management and looking at any kind of correlation between extractions, i.e. pumping, and water elevations, the folks from Montgomery and Associates couldn't find a definitive correlation in the Upper Valley and Forebay. So the translation, pumping doesn't really matter that much. Well, I'm kind of overselling it, but there's not a strong correlation between pumping and groundwater elevations. So what is? And so Gus has listed a number of different elements that need to be sorted out. That's part of the work, is to go through that technical evaluation and really find out where the correlations are. The good thing about demand management is that it can be turned off and on. It can be focused on a specific area and not used widely throughout a subbasin. So it has a fair amount of flexibility, can be a good tool. But I think we're going to find that groundwater elevations in the Forebay and in the Upper Valley are largely driven by what kind of rainfall and reservoir releases that we have on a year-to-year basis. When it rains, the basins fill up. When we have good rainfall, good releases, the sub-basins are fairly full, and we're able to, be able to extract water and stay within our management. Also, that there is a mention about some of the wells showing a long-term decline. That long-term decline, in my mind, is largely dependent upon the time frame that we select. And over the last 30 years, we've had a pretty dry run over the last 10 or 15 years, and that may indeed have impacted some of the groundwater elevations. And in fact, if you look at the overall average, the Forebay in particular has rebounded significantly over the last couple of years because it's been wet. So, this is a long, kind of drawn out example, a series of examples. To mention, I think we're going to find that environmental conditions and reservoir releases are going to be a key element in our strategy to develop any kind of management actions that are wrapped around a demand management program. And they're likely going to be in response to drought conditions. That's my gut, but we need to go through that exercise. So you have that scope of work in front of you. That scope of work is really focused on sorting out those details and then thinking about how we integrate the SMC TAC into our decision-making process. And as we go through those steps, we'll be meeting with the advisory committee, your advisory committee, in order to sort some of that out. We'll have some meetings here with the full board and with the idea of ultimately developing a framework in which we can develop a demand management program. And my hope is we'll be able to integrate that into the Forebay GSP update that's going to be conducted this year, ready for submittal to DWR about this time in 2027. So I think the timing's good. I think what we're doing is the right kind of thing. It'll put us in a good position to go through this process and have a better idea how we can use those really good resources that we have in the SMC TAC. So with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, maybe we should we go ahead and do public comments first, and then have a comment review action after that. That's how it's kind of written out in the agenda.
I have a raised hand from Mr. Versick.
Mr. Versick.
Thank you, Chair. Tom Versick speaking. Bottom line on this is run with it. This is an appropriate approach for a number of reasons that Mr. Weeks has covered. He may cover a few more when he talks about the Forebay meeting yesterday. Some other dynamics came up from that yesterday. And after DWR's December letter and presentation of the 18400, noting a number of difficulties with its periodic review. The good actor exemption in Sigma, should state intervention ever occur, is more than a mere theoretical possibility at this point. So that additional reason. And then one other thing, which is not necessarily for Mr. Yates or a technical review, but when you get around to the policy level after that's all done, is that just to keep in mind that Sigma, and I don't know the statute off the top of my head, but there is a statute in Sigma that allows that recognizes, is a better way of putting it, recognizes that during droughts, groundwater levels may dip substantially and then they may come back up, and those are not counted, again, per the statute, as a some kind of violation or bad result, so long as they come up after. So that perhaps is for later. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Versick. Any other comments, public comments?
We've got no other hands raised.
I think we have a hand raised over
But
here.
we have a live one.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mike, and the board. So I fully support the scope of services that is needed at this time. That caught my attention, excuse me, I'm sorry, Community Greenfield, and now a member of the Salinas Valley Basin GSA Advisory Committee. And I've been on a crash course the last 90 days and trying to catch up to you all as far as, water advocates and water coalitions and the Alliance in Salinas and just everything that the agency is working on right now. And I do have to say that I didn't bring the copy, but I just got a copy from the copy machine, was the letter from the Salinas Valley Water Alliance recently. That letter saved me a lot of time and research. If you have any chance, get a copy of that letter, and there's a whole lot of good information there. I just wanted to, in the name of transparency, to bring that out and the good work that that coalition has done for so many years. But caught my attention. What I was saying was the two objectives. It seems like they're like overall, and then you have the task 1, 2, and 3. They're all equally important. So it's set up pretty well. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
No raised hands.
Well, then we can actually, let's take it to the board then. Any comments?
Nothing.
I have a comment just on what you were talking about earlier, Curtis, when you were talking about the lack of correlation between, on the Montgomery documents, between water levels and pumping. Could part of that be the amount of return that takes place from a lot of the pumping that happens in the Fort Bay, Arroyo Seco, and Upper Valley, the return flow back to the aquifer?
It could be. Yeah, I mean, that could certainly play a role, because that water is being returned to the groundwater basin. But what you might find in certain groundwater basins is that there is a direct correlation between groundwater elevations and how much gets pumped. I mean, the more you pump, the lower it would go. But if those basins are sustainable, if they have sources of recharge that allow them to recover, like especially the forebay, and even more importantly, the Arroyo Seco Cone management area. The fact that we've got a river out there that provides 1/3 of the flow in the Salinas River downstream of the river, that's a pretty big input into a water balance. It's not surprising to me that there's not a direct correlation. Now, there are a number of elements that are laid out, and I don't have them off the top of my head. I apologize, but I do know that reservoir releases and recharge were a big part of the weather conditions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious since you brought that up.
Sure.
So we have like review and action here. So what, right?
So I would ask that you would ask the board for a motion to approve the scope.
Do I hear a motion for approving this?
Yeah, move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We ready to go on to the next item then?
We're
Step
ready.
2, receive a Royal Groundwater Sustainability Agency's General Manager's Status Report. 8, oral report.
As Mr. Versick mentioned in his comments, there have been a number of implementation subcommittee meetings that have occurred over the last week. One yesterday, the 4-Bay. But in addition, there was a advisory committee meeting last week that we held. And it's not 100% clear to me exactly how the advisory committee and their board of directors and the Salinas Valley Basin GSA's board works with the implementation committees. The message that we kind of got was the implementation subcommittees were going to receive information. They weren't going to like route it up for approval in front of the board, and the board was going to essentially select what items they want the advisory committee to look at. Most importantly, there's a number of things that has to happen this year. The Salinas Valley Basin GSA really needs to focus on figuring out a solution to seawater intrusion and some of the degradation of groundwater elevations in the east side and other areas in the northern end of the valley. And so there's a number of projects that are being looked at. The board of directors needs to think about taking action by the end of this year on moving forward, because we know that water supply projects take a decade, in terms of planning, going through CEQA, getting funded. And the ones that we're talking about are not small. It's not small change. They're in hundreds of millions of dollars kind of range. And so it's going to take time. Just the environmental stuff can take 2-3 years anyway. So it's like 10 years, right? We're supposed to have sustainability by 2040. So we have a short window and a lot to do. So the principal thing that we talked about at the advisory committee was an update on the hydrogeologic model. That's kind of the baseline theoretical model for the Salinas Valley basins, all the subbasins. So it's got hydrologies involved, and there are different aquifers in the north, and there's the confluence of the rivers and the operation of the reservoirs and how all of those things matter, in terms of our groundwater basins. And it was a really good presentation. It was pretty thorough. For me, the most nuanced and perhaps new information had to do with the deep aquifer. And I think that there's a fair amount of new is probably a poor choice of words, recent development, in terms of the Salinas Valley of groundwater in that aquifer, and especially on the north end, where their seawater intrusion is impacting some of the wells for agriculture. So there's a lot more development in that deeper body of water. One of the things that the Salinas Valley Basin did in its run-up to looking at the deep aquifers, they looked further afield. They went down past Gonzales and into the upper portion of the 4-Bay and identified aquifers, water-bearing areas where there was water that was deep, like there is in that northernmost portion of the 180-400. That's where most of the development is. And in fact, that was one of my questions to the presenters. How many wells do we have in the 4-Bay area in those deep waters? Because candidly, there's a whole lot of ground above that is water bearing. And why would anybody drill that deep? They don't have to. We can ask Mr. Grieva. He probably knows better than most of us. But it's a pretty good source of water, the 4-Bay aquifer system. A lot of sand and gravels, high transmissivity. Get a lot out. A lot goes in. Anyways, the answer, there are 2. Count them, 2 wells. So there's not a lot of development. in those deep systems. And then the other question I asked was, what are the recharge mechanisms for that deep aquifer? Which I thought was a fair question. And there's not enough known about that body of water to really identify. There is no superficial recharge from the river downward. That's because of all the clay lenses and how complicated that set of aquifers really is in that northern portion of the valley. It's got to go through the 180 aquitard, has to go through the 400 aquitard. It just, there's not a lot of evidence that there's direct connection with the surface. And in fact, as water levels fall, there's not a lot of connection with the 400. There's movement laterally, but that's probably, as a result of the drawdown from the various wells. And the reason why I ask these questions is I think it's fair that folks are going to have to do more work, i.e. it's going to cost more. There's going to be more monitoring. And frankly, I don't really think it's a fair proposition for those of us in the forebay, and especially those of us in the Arroyo Seco Cone, to be on the hook for doing that work. And just in terms of equity. And so I asked those questions so I'd have, an understanding of what the state of our understanding is. But in addition to that, there was one portion of the presentation that got me a little bit concerned. And it goes something like this. There's a section, cut through the whole valley. So it shows bedrock to surface. Yeah. And, as you're going along from the ocean, the bedrock kind of goes down and it comes back up about where the forebay is, and then stays kind of shallow as we go into the upper valley. We kind of know that. We've known that there's a lot more sand and gravels that gets a little deeper in the forebay, and it gets really deep, in the area close to the coast. But that's not to say that it was all one bathtub. Unfortunately, the woman making the presentation used the term bathtub, but she was referring to that area in front of the forebay that makes up that deep section, not the entire basin. There are individuals that have used the term bathtub, which I think is a poor analogy for what we have in these aquifer systems. I just want to say that, get that on the record, because it'll probably come up. Lots of people were paying attention. But it was a good presentation. It gives us a good understanding of how they'll do the modeling to look at things, and that's important because in the next couple of months, that advisory committee is going to be tasked with evaluating a number of proposed projects to be able to supply water to the north. And as those things kick off, I'll come to you and talk with you more about them. So I'm going to pause. I still want to talk about the forebay subcommittee meeting, but any questions about that first part? Comments?
Should we ask the public about that, or have them wait till your
I
time?
would say wait, because I'll get through this next part as quick as I can. I just want to make sure you guys had any questions. The second meeting, it was the forebay implementation subcommittee meeting, was yesterday. And there was a section on demand management. And, in that discussion, it was pretty clear that the framework that is now under development for the Salinas Valley Basin GSA has got a lot of work to do. It's just a framework. They're going to do more economic analysis. But one of the things that we heard from the guys that were in attendance is that, hey, we understood that that piece was part of a deliverable. There was a grant for the 180-400. It may not really be applicable to us. And the other thing that I heard quite a bit was, where was the equity going to be in that demand management program? Because as long as it rains, we're pretty sustainable. And so I can tell you there's going to be a lot more controversy around that demand management program as we get down the road. The idea is to have a more detailed framework, maybe even a policy by November of this year. We'll see. I think it's going to be very difficult to get there. I think it's going to take a lot of work. And I think given what the state has been looking at and wanting in this last update from the 180-400, demand management is going to have to be at least better detailed as how it might work in the 180-400 and pressure zone in particular and on the east side. But I can tell you it's going to be hard to demonstrate any effective demand management program in terms of its impact on seawater intrusion. Demand management in its core is reduction in the amount of extractions, hopefully that groundwater elevations will rise. Now, that means there's a correlation between extractions and groundwater, which is not the case in the forebay. Just want to make sure you guys are tracking. But in the case of the east side and the pressure 180, there probably is a correlation. I haven't seen it yet, but it's got to be developed. I do know that raising groundwater elevations in the pressure 180 will have an impact, but it will not have enough of an impact to push back seawater intrusion in the time frame that we've got. Because, frankly, that water's all mixed up. It's, that seawater treated water is not all ocean water. It's part fresh water, and it's going to get mixed. That means, groundwater's got to be pretty high, and it's got to be higher than sea level all the way out to back to the ocean, and it's going to take decades because water doesn't move quickly through the ground. And we got to have the right kind of gradient, right? We got to let gravity push it. Well, if you look at the groundwater elevations, there's a problem just east and south of Salinas, where there's a pretty low depression in groundwater elevations in the east side, because the east side is got really tight kind of clay soils. Water doesn't move through it very quick. And it's been, developed year after year after year after year. And those groundwater elevations have fallen. And so now you got this depression that's sucking in some of that seawater. So it's a complicated problem that I'm not convinced that demand management by itself is going to fix. But the state is going to require, I'm sure, some component of it in the plan. And that is going to create some concern by folks in the north. So we get into this we're going to get into, I'm sure, a long dialogue around this program. That was one thing. It was crystal clear from the committee members that they didn't really have any desire to subsidize a program in the north that had no benefit to them. They wanted equity, and that's understandable. The other thing that we talked a little bit about, the whole update of our GSP. And, there's a number of things, if you recall, that we were deficient on. One of them was talking about water quality, and the state is interested in more definition in our plan about any impacts to water quality that are extraction related. Now, the good news is there's already been some work done, and there's no correlation between nitrate contamination and extractions. That's a good thing. And it would be complicated anyways, because the way nitrogen gets into the soil and turns into nitrate, it's through fertilizers and it goes through the Vados range, and it takes decades. And so the stuff that we have in the groundwater now is really old. And things have changed since then. So nitrogen is a complicated issue. Salt management might be a part, but the whole thing is that we need to do a little bit better job on talking about water quality relative to extractions. The one that I'm concerned about is the whole discussion about integrated surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystems. You guys have heard me. I know I'm a broken record, but the state still hasn't provided guidance to us about what that means. And at its worst, it could be an unfunded mandate to protect habitat by restricting pumping in areas. There has been some work done in the Russian River that's not applicable to the Salinas. The Salinas is a managed system where we have reservoir releases. It's complicated. We're going through an HCP, in terms of habitat conservation on just the Salinas River. So it's not going to be an easy one, and we're all on the edge of our seats waiting for that guidance, but it'll be part and parcel to the update. And as it develops, I will bring it to you. We have been participants in the GDE work thus far. I think Gus's guidance to the group of biologists that was engaged was really, really helpful. But nevertheless, we just have kind of identified where they are. We haven't talked about monitoring or if they have any impacts due to groundwater extractions, what that might look like in terms of management. So we're at the beginning of a very long road, and I don't know where it's going to lead. But I'm watching closely. That's my report.
Very good. Thank you, Curtis. Let's have public comments if there are any.
Mr. Versick.
Thank you, General Manager Weeks and Chair Tom Versick again. Just going to let you know to the extent anyone is interested, I wrote a letter dated December 31st to DWR on the framework being an explicit part of the 180-400 round one grant, and that it was a deliverable, and certain flaws and things that met or didn't meet or other kinds of issues. So a copy of it obviously went to the Salinas Valley Basin GSA. Maybe they'll make it public, maybe they won't, but if anyone wants to see it, which is not short, it's a pretty long letter with a lot of other documents, happy to supply it to whomever. It is public. It went to DWR, therefore it is fully public. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Versick.
Thank you. John?
Afternoon again, Chair Griva. So one of the comments at the joint Forebay and the Upper Valley Committee meeting yesterday that I made was, I think the cities need to kind of shout out. The cities have been part of the Salinas Valley Basin CSIP for over 33 years, paying through their property taxes, through the assessments. And then the Salinas Valley, the Salinas River Diversion Facility, the SRDF, as well later down the line in 2012, 2013. So I think I know a local farmer mentioned that, well, that was just a drop in the bucket, the amount of money that, in those 33 years that the cities have financed for these very important projects, the CSIP and the Salinas River Diversion Facility and the Salinas Valley Water Project. But at the same time, support is pretty large. I mean, the cities have supported these county type projects connected to the Salinas River. And I think one of the comments that I wanted to make at our next advisory committee, I know that the ARS project in the Monterey Peninsula started very, I remember I had a good friend of mine, may he rest in peace, Mayor Rubio from Seaside, was part of that initial effort to start drilling wells to pump water from the Carmel River to the Seaside Basin. I worked in this Carmel Valley for over 16 years, so I was part of that, knowing that there was those improvements happening. And they did 4 wells. It took many years. But I think and I'm just starting out on this venture, trying to help the advisory committee and the Salinas Valley Basin. But I think there may be something there as far as the cities. I did hear the new council member from Salinas mention about the ag water and the Monterey County Water Resources staff member mentioned, well, we're not using that water at this moment. So possibly that the city of Salinas could be a main player in these projects to stop and to definitely stop the seawater intrusion happening in the 1-800-400. But I think there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 2 to 3 years that I believe everybody, from what I heard yesterday at the Bay Upper Valley Committee meeting, they want to get to work and want to clarify, our part here in South County. Again, I mean, are we going to continue invest and pay our tax dollars for those projects in the north when we see no benefits from those? And so I think that's something that a lot of folks are looking at, but I wanted to take that opportunity to share about the cities. I think the cities is important. As a matter of fact, if I'm not, and Curtis can correct me if I'm wrong, but that project, I keep going back to it, the ASR. I'm doing a lot of research on it right now. As a matter of fact, I think it develops into the Monterey 1 water project, where they do the recycling, because that water management district took over that entire project, and now they're working together with the Monterey 1 water. And so years ago, it was just, they were just drilling one well, and then now it's led to this phenomenal project. I don't know if you've all, I've been reading a lot about the Monterey 1 water project. It's fascinating, all the things that are happening on the peninsula as far as recycling water. So I just thought I'd share that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Any other comments?
Nope, that was my report
Then
for.
it's back to us, I guess, the agency board. Any comments from our board?
No, nothing for me.
Very good. Well, let's see, do we, any action item on this or no? No. Then the report's received. Well, thank you, Curtis.
Yep.
I think that brings us to the conclusion of today's meeting. So, thank you all, and shall we adjourn?
Perfect, thank you.
Good.